Nails popping in the ceiling, you hear them sometimes at night and you wonder what's going on. It's just the structure breathing a little bit to adjust for its equilibrium. Foundation settlement, very, very common in the Bay Area. You cannot ignore this phenomenon at all. Foundation settlement has to do with how the soil that the foundation sits on behaves, because it's a direct translation of the movement in the soil. Imagine a kitchen sponge. It absorbs all the moisture during the rain season and it swells and upheaves, so it pushes everything up. And then during the dry summer months, it loses all the moisture, shrinks and cracks and goes down. This is the part of my inspection report that never goes noticed. People usually make it a habit not to even read through these. We even make it a point to have just 5 lines of maintenance, and it still gets unnoticed. Foundation settlement, very, very common in the Bay Area. You cannot ignore this phenomenon at all. Foundation settlement has to do with how the soil that the foundation sits on behaves, because it's a direct translation of the movement in the soil translated over to the foundation and then to the structure. So when we're standing on the floor, we can see differences in the floor levels. We can see gaps at the bottom of the baseboard or in the backsplash tiles. We can see some cracking in the finishes. Or if you have cabinets, there's separation between the cabinets and the ceiling drywall. So all of these things would be indication of settlement. On the outside, if you have door and window openings, you would see a diagonal crack, or you would see cracking along the joints. You can even physically feel or visually see the difference. All of these would have to do with either a structural damage, but in most cases, it'll be because of foundation settlement resulting in that damage or insufficient support. Common causes would be expansive clay soil. Because we're in the Bay Area, we have what is called an expansive clay or adobe formation clay or Santa Clara clay formation. All of these types of soil have clay content. Imagine a kitchen sponge. And this is a great analogy that I was subjected to when I first started out, is that it absorbs all the moisture during the rain season and it swells and upheaves, so it pushes everything up. And then during the dry summer months, it loses all the moisture, shrinks and cracks and goes down, so the foundation goes down along with it. So this movement happens since the structure has been built on the soil. So it keeps going up and down and up and down and up and down every year that we have the rain season and the dry summer months. And the amount of movement has to do with how much moisture interaction happens with the soil that the foundation sits on. If you have really good drainage situation, then you have less movement because the movement is mitigated and it is minimized. But if you have a very poor drainage system, then your movement is going to be more sinusoidal. But the problem here is that after a certain point, the level starts to kind of go down because the soil gets stirred up and gets mixed up so much that it starts losing its bearing capacity slowly over the course of several years, and in a lot of cases over the course of several decades. So it gets past its maximum settlement allowance, and then it keeps moving up and down and settles way further. And that's when we get called in and we go, okay, let's measure the floors and see how much of a sloping or difference that we're looking at to see what could be causing it. Poorly compacted fill, if your structure is built in a engineered fill area, if the fill is not of good quality and if it's not compacted properly, then water. If you're on a hill slope, you can also have soil creep, which is the lateral movement, slow lateral movement of the soil that can also cause settlement in the foundation or difference in the level of the foundation. And then there is your drainage issue. I mean, you can never ignore water in any situation. Drainage issues can also cause movement in the soil, translating to movement in the structure, i.e. foundation settlement. Again, we went through the science of settlement. There's going to be cracking on the interior and the exterior wall finishes. There's the floor starts to become uneven. During the winter months, the doors and windows get really difficult to open and close because the frame starts to stick up a little bit. And then, during your summer months, you just give a gentle push and it goes and shuts quite easily. Nails popping in the ceiling, you hear them sometimes at night and you wonder what's going on. It's just the structure breathing a little bit to adjust for its equilibrium. Presence of cracks in the basement wall, that's again, or foundation cracks also sometimes indicate settlement in the foundation. And then chimneys, which are trying to lean, means there's a localized subsidence or settlement in that area that the chimney's foundation is going through. This is a simple illustration of an expansive clay soil. We just show the clay molecules and how the water, kind of goes and arranges itself in a clay content or in a soil with a clay content. On the left-hand side, you see a photo where it shows a lot of cracks. It's just all the moisture has gone away from the soil and it has dried up because the volume of that entire soil has lost all the water molecules because they evaporated, and now they have voids that is showing up as cracks. More illustrations to show how expansive clay soil can cause cracking in the basement or the foundation and causing one portion of the structure to lean or settle. Again, on the right-hand side, you have a structure built on a hill slope or a land sloping area that goes through a soil creep. It's a gradual movement of the soil along the slope or along a lateral fashion. Zip level. So in order to quantify the amount of movement in a structure, we use a zip level, which is a high precision liquid pressure based equipment. It can actually measure the level of the floor to a precision of 1/8 of an inch. We put it in different spots on the floor of a structure to find out how much of a difference we're looking at on the entire structure. We do an as-built of the entire structure, and then we kind of identify the stress points or the load-bearing points, interior walls, on either sides of the door frames or window frames to make sure, and then central areas that have a little bit of upheave if we find any. So we identify the high spots and then try to see how much of sloping or settlement we are experiencing in that structure. Industry standard tolerance is defined as 1 inch in 20 lateral feet. So let's say where you're standing is 0. In 20 feet away from you in any direction, it can either be plus 1 inch or minus 1 inch, and that's considered within tolerance. Some engineers for older structures go out of their way and say, you know what, 1.25 inches or 1.5 inches is still fine because of the larger size of the structure and the age of the structure put into perspective. When you start breaching that tolerance is when you see a lot of these typical indications that we went through in this signs of foundation settlement that you'll start to see, and you'll pick up the phone and give us a call. Foundation settlement can be corrected by different ways. Sometimes you can just adjust the floor framing. The foundation is still at the same level. It doesn't necessarily prevent the foundation from settling in the future. All you do is lift and re-level the floor diaphragm and the floor framing or the support framing, and then you shim or grout the gap that you created by lifting everything, and then you reconnect everything to establish the load path. So that's an intermediate option that, because it has to do with a lot of temporary supports and identifying the load-bearing points, most contractors or engineers are not very comfortable recommending that as an option. This is something that we do quite frequently and very well versed in the design and the construction aspects of this. So we give that as an option to most of our clients. Lifting and releveling is not a permanent solution, but it basically resets the time clock. So it puts you back into acceptable tolerance, and then you maintain proper drainage and continue to monitor. That gives you about 10 to 15 years if you have an ideal situation, so you don't have to turn back and worry about adjusting the floors every so often. The more permanent solutions have to do with terminology called underpinning of the foundation. Now, underpinning is something that is used loosely in a lot of different terms. Some engineers or contractors say that we're going to underpin your foundation, and yet the pier or the deeper foundation component that they use is just 3 to 5 feet deep. There is no geotechnical investigation that's done. There is no understanding of what depth the deep foundation has to be embedded into or supported on, and how you're going to establish that bearing capacity or by means of skin friction or end bearing. So there's multiple different things that goes into the design aspect of using an underpinning component. Typical underpinning components used in the Bay Area, or for that matter, any foundation structure, would have to do with push piers that are steel, helical anchors that are also steel, and then concrete drill piers that, you can either have a soldier pile concrete pier or a reinforced concrete pier with the regular rebar. So there's multiple ways of underpinning a foundation. But the most important thing, because we live in the Bay Area, is to understand the soil that you are going to advance this deeper foundation component into in order to permanently support your existing foundation and structure. Oftentimes, I come across companies recommending push piers as a retrofit underpinning option. As long as you understand the soil that you are pushing the pier, the pile into, then you can, comfortably and confidently design it and install it and make sure that it is able to support the weight of the structure, because it's a resistance-based system. An easier and a better and efficient way would be to use either a helical anchor system or a concrete drill pier system, whichever is cheaper and the best way for that particular location and situation. Here we have a drilled concrete pier that is basically concrete pier going down into the ground, supported on the bedrock or embedded into the bedrock, and now it's going to hold up your foundation pretty much at the grade level or slightly beneath the grade. Here's a photo or illustration of how helical anchors would support your foundation. These are, typical underpinning elements. They're installed somewhere between 6 and 8 feet spacing, typically, so that one anchor is not in the zone of influence of the other anchor, and they're not interfering with the support conditions. Helical anchors are usually torqued into the ground. So there is a torque-based mechanism that gives you the capacity, axial compression or tension capacity that you can derive from these components. Helical anchors, in most cases, require soils investigation. So you find out where your hard strata or bedrock is, and you get the recommendations of a soils engineer saying that is the minimum depth that your helical anchor has to be embedded and torqued into. Because if they understand the soil and they say that at this deposit, at this depth from the top of the grade, your anchor is going to get your capacity to support the weight coming down, then it's easier for structural engineers to design the anchors for that situation. So it's always important to understand what type of soil that you're dealing with in every situation before you find out which underpinning component to use for that particular situation. Helical anchors don't necessarily have a greater lateral capacity. So if you have soil creep or a landslide or lateral force pushing the soil down or the structure along with it, then helical anchors have a very minor rating in resisting lateral forces. In that case, we switch to a concrete pier. Concrete piers can be designed for vertical compression and tension, and can also be designed for lateral shear capacities. So because we're in the seismic prone zone, in most cases, a concrete drill pier would be your ideal underpinning component.
Okay.
All right. So now we enter into the general maintenance. This is the part of my inspection report that never goes noticed. People usually make it a habit not to even read through these. We even make it a point to have just 5 lines of maintenance, and it still gets unnoticed, because typically having your foundation inspected is kind of like car maintenance. You don't want to be stranded on the side of the freeway and waiting for a tow truck or a cop to stop by and ask you what's going on because you didn't maintain your car, you didn't go through the general service. The same thing applies for a residential property or any structure for that matter. You have periodic inspections to make sure that the foundation, the framing, the anchorage, the connections, and all of the drainage conditions, they're all serviceable, and your structure is in continued service providing condition until the next inspection. Typically, if your structure and the foundation is pretty good, then we say that you can have one inspection once every 3 to 5 years. But since we have a lot of aggressive movement and corrosion environment in the Bay Area, we say that have your foundation inspected once every 2 to 3 years by a qualified professional who knows what they're doing, who's in this area, understands the soil type and the foundation structures, knows a little bit of history of how these structures were put together in different parts of the Bay Area, and then is able to give you the right recommendations, be it just simple maintenance or immediately go for these repairs or temporary supports, and then go ahead with this particular regimen for monitoring maintenance. So that's definitely something that has to be of top priority. People understand this in terms of septic tank cleaning, in terms of termite inspections, in terms of getting their appliances checked a lot of times. But foundation and drainage for a structure is also at the same level of importance, if not even more, because that is the confines within which you live and you make happy memories. And then, other things that associate to it, like, keeping your gutters clean, having your pest inspections done, checking for leaks, and then implementing a pest management program that gives you longevity of your structure. So we just make it a point to throw it out there in front of people so they can, have these checks in a periodic fashion. So that brings us to the end of, everything that has to do with drainage and foundation on a residential level in most cases. And, typically what we find from an inspection, what to look for, your top priority items. You'll come across situations that are much different, that are really head scratchers, even at a residential level. But my recommendation is to have somebody like me or somebody that is, experienced and qualified in this situation, in this area, to look at it and give you the right recommendations moving forward.